We thank the library for hosting us here. This is a great venue for these lectures, and they've been a great partner for us. And Adobe has also been a great partner. They help us record these sessions, so you can, if you missed anything or you want to share it with friends, they're recorded and they'll be posted on our website at letterformarchive.org on the event page for each event. And these lectures are part of the Typeface program at Letterform Archive. Typeface is an education program. It's a full-year type design program, one of the few places you can do that. And we have students here that come to each of our lectures, and you can talk to them about what that experience is like. And then when we open it up to the next year applications, then you'll want to apply. We'll have more news about that on coming up on our site, and more news about other events from Letterform Archive on that address. And we have a workshop coming up from Typeface that'll be really interesting, drawing on the iPad with James Edmondson and Tad Wagner. Tad's a graduate of Type at Cooper West, and James is our lead type design instructor. And actually, this is out of order. Oh, okay. Well, there's one other thing coming up, and that is our next lecture. And that is on what date?
It's 2 weeks.
In two weeks from today, and that will be Lars Kim talking about Korean typography and printing. She's very well informed about that work, and it's going to be a really fascinating lecture, so we highly recommend coming to that. April 2nd. So before I introduce Abdoulaye and Ibrahim, I have to say I'm personally very excited about this lecture because it's a really a unique story. Earlier today, we were at the archive looking at our collection of Eastern manuscripts and all of these scripts and writing systems that have been around for hundreds of years. And that's incredible, but you never meet the inventor of these scripts. That's almost unheard of. And it's probably completely unheard of to have the inventor, of a script that is alive and well, and also the script is being used by thousands or millions of people. And that's why this case is so unusual and so special, and we're really grateful that Ibrahim and Abdoulaye could be with us. The other two names that you read about are Mark Jamara and Neil Patel, and they're type designers who are helping the script become usable on the computer with the first kind of full-featured font family for Adlam. So no further ado, let's get right to Ibrahim and Abdoulaye.
Hello, everyone. Let me wear my hat. I like this hat because it actually got Adlam written on it. My name is Abdoulaye, and I'm from Guinea in West Africa. And I would like to thank the Letterform Archives for inviting us here. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Rob. And thank you guys also for all your work on Adlam. So we are here to tell you about Adlam. Like he said, it's a script that started 30 years ago. So we'll try maybe in 30 minutes to give you a little bit of story about how it started and where it stands today. So before we do that, I'll tell you a little bit about Africa just to put everything into context. So this is a map of Africa. So the country where I'm from is over there on the Atlantic Ocean to the left, I guess, on the screen. It says Guinea. And it's a big continent. I think it's the second biggest continent in the world. It's got the fastest growing economies. It's got 1.3 billion people. And it's got more than 2,100 languages spoken in the continent. But I always think of that as an overstatement because when you think of 2,100 languages, they are not all big languages the way you would think of English and Spanish or French. There are, for example, in West Africa, we have hundreds, if not thousands of languages, but mainly there are like 5 to 10 languages that are spoken across that region of Africa. So there are 54 countries, and the Fulanis, which is the tribe or the ethnic group for which we created this alphabet, are found in 20 of those, more than 20 of those 54 countries. So, like I said, there are more than 1.3 billion people in Africa. 250 million of them are also smartphone users. That's to just tell you how important smartphones are today in the continent. When I was there recently, when you meet somebody, they usually have at least 2 phones or 1 phone that takes 2 SIMs for connection, in order for them to connect easily. So like I said, the Fulanis are present in more than 20 countries, and they call themselves Pular, but everybody else calls them in English. So if you read about them in English books, they are referred to as Fulani. Why? Because that's the name the Hausa people used to call them in Nigeria, and this is how the English or the British people were introduced to them, through the Nigerians, the Hausas. But the French speakers call them Pearl, and also that's because when the French arrived in Africa, the first country where they entered, which is Senegal, the local people, they refer to the Fulani people as Pel. And so the French people, when they started writing about us, they called us Pearl. But we call ourselves Pulo if it's one person, or Fulbe if it's many people. And we are found across, that map that I showed you earlier, all of this red part, you can find Fulanis there. From the Atlantic Ocean here all the way to the Nile banks in Sudan, sometimes even in Ethiopia, you can find Fulanis. More than 50 million people. And they have subgroups among them. If you read about Fulanis, you see what are there. It's a subgroup of Fulanis. They speak the Fulani language. You see Bororo, you see Wasulum, Kasonke, all of those are Fulanis. In Senegal, we have a subgroup called Tokulor. That's also another subgroup of Fulani. We are historically nomadic people, and that's the reason why we can be found from the edges of the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Sudan in the eastern part of Africa. So we created many kingdoms in Nigeria and Mali and Senegal and other places. The language that we speak is called Fulfulde. If you are on the eastern part of Africa, but it's called Pular if you are in the western part of Africa. But both names are interchangeable, and mostly in many documents that are written about the language, you will see Fulfulde, or you will see Fulani. But in the French-speaking countries, usually they call it Pular or Pearl, la langue Pearl. So whenever you see that, just know that it's being referred to, they're talking about the Fulani language. So it's spoken in more than 20 countries, and it's recognized by the African Union as one of the main languages, and also the ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States. Originally, this language was written using the Ajami script. The Ajami script is an Arabic script that's a little bit modified to adapt to the African languages. But we have many sounds in the Pular languages that do not exist in Arabic. So it's hard to actually use the Ajami script to write the Pular language. And that's actually the reason why we'll get to Adlam later on. But recently, with colonization, people, when the Europeans came to Africa, they introduced the Latin alphabet, and also we started using that. No standard though, because the way we write it in Guinea is not the same way it's written in Senegal, and it's not the same way it's written in Nigeria. So there are always issues in reading something that's written across countries. But like I said, most of this stuff, because we embraced Islam early on, like early in the 10th century, 11th century, so we started writing using the Ajami, but like I said, we couldn't use it properly because, there's no standard. Nobody got together and decided, okay, this is how. Like, for example, for the sound A that we have in Pular, that's not in Arabic, this is how you should write it. Or the if you write in Iyang, how should you write it? So some people wrote it using the Jim Arab or the Ya Arab. So if you didn't understand the language, if you saw that written, you will have issues. Even for the people who spoke the language, it was a problem to read those letters because when you see Iyang, it's sometimes written Jijang, sometimes it's written Yiyang. So you have to be knowledgeable in Arabic and very knowledgeable in Pular and be used to how people write because everyone basically wrote the way they understood Arabic or the way they understood how to read it and the way they felt like the Fulani sounds could be represented in Arabic. So there was no standard. So, back in those days, like in the 80s, 90s, communication was not that easy as it is today. People didn't have cell phones or telephones. And the Fulani people, like I said earlier, we are nomadic people, so we travel a lot. So we are usually found in places where we are not originally from. So for example, me, I was born in Guinea, which is the southern part of, I was born in Zerekore, which is the southern part of Guinea, but my parents are from the middle part of Guinea. It's called in a region called Futa Jalon. So if you wanted to communicate with one of your relatives that lives hundreds miles or 1,000 miles away, you write a letter, you go to the taxi station or the bus station, you give it to somebody, and then you tell them, okay, if you go to this town, I have my relative there, this is their name, and this is what they do, and they're from this village, please find them and give them this letter. And then once that person received that letter, because like I said, it was hard to read Arabic, to read Pular written in Arabic script, so they would find somebody who is specialized in reading those kind of letters. And usually elders, like my dad in the city where we were born, he was known as somebody who could read letters, translate them for people. And we learned next to him to read those letters. We got good at it, and then finally people would give them letters sometimes. Or sometimes my dad would even give us the letters, or when people come home and my dad is not there, we would read the letters for them. But like I said earlier, there was always difficulties reading those letters, to the point when one day I asked my dad, is there a way to write Pular so that when I'm reading I don't have to guess? Or so that when somebody is reading, he or she doesn't have to guess or doesn't have any problems with reading. So my dad told us the only script or the only writing system that he knows for the Pular language is Arabic, is the Ajami script. So we told him that's not really for Fulani because we all have problems reading these letters. So he said, okay, that's all he knows. He doesn't have any idea of another alphabet or another script. So one day also, my mom used to have a rice bar next to the city center. So I used to go there after school to hang out. And then I met this guy there who's traveled a lot around West Africa, and he told me that there were Fulanis all over West Africa, but that we always have, because we speak different dialects because of the regions, that people have been working in trying to standardize the language so that we can understand each other. But the way to do that, they've been thinking of inventing or creating an alphabet, but they have not been able to. So with that and the talk that I had with my dad, so I told my brother that we should create an alphabet for our language. So that's how the idea came about. And usually what will happen is when we come from school, we'll go in a room, we'll lock ourselves, and then we'll take a piece of papers, close our eyes and start drawing signs, and then we'll open our eyes and then we'll see from what we drew, you see this is like an example. We'll try to pick from this what would look like a letter to us. Or sometimes when I'm in school, I'm thinking about the words in the Fulani language in Fulfulde. I'll think of a letter that doesn't exist, and then I'll start thinking about how that letter should look like. So when I go home, then I'll talk to my brother, and then we'll go and then start drawing it. And that's how we worked, and then we got 27 letters. And we told my dad, we came to my dad and told him, okay, we think we have a Fulani alphabet. He thought it was a joke. But we told him, seriously, we have an alphabet, and we showed it to him. He didn't believe us. So he said, okay, if you guys think you got an alphabet, let me call. We had a relative who worked for the government. So he told that guy to come and check on something that his kids are talking about. So that guy came, And he decided, we showed it to him, and he decided to test us to see if it's really an alphabet that can be used to write. So he would ask me to leave the room, and then he'll ask my brother to write a word, and then he called me and asked me to read it. And then he would do the same thing to me. He even did it to my sister, who was the first person to learn the alphabet too. So we did it, and then he asked us to write all of the hard words, the words that are usually hard to write using the Ajami Arabic script, or to words that are hard to write using the Latin script. So we wrote all of them. One example was silbadere, because it has the ba, and it's a long word, but you cannot write it exactly in Arabic or in Latin. So we wrote all of that, and then he turned to my dad. He said, he thinks that we have an alphabet that can write the Fulani language. Basically, that's how it started. Started out with the 27 letters, and eventually we added a 28th letter that's mostly used in Arabic, but we also use it in our language for proper names, like the Ga. That's the letter Ga, but it's very rare in our language. So basically, that's how it started, and then we called the Bindi Pular, which basically meant the Fulani writing. So I'll let my brother continue. All right.
Good evening. So, as my brother said, when we have the 28 letters, the first person we taught how to read and write was my sister. She's the one here. When we taught her how to read and write, then we started teaching at the market, the local market. The picture at the corner there, I am there with the red and blue yellow jacket, and my brother is behind me. People next to us are the first student we have. Also, we have the notebook from my sister, the first notebook she had. So when we started teaching and we started producing books, we started writing book. The first book we read was the latest stories in our language from our culture. So those are the first generation of book. What happened with this one, all the writing system was connected, joined together. But by the time we were teaching people at the market, we realized that most of the people, it's easier to read how to write. It's easier to learn how to read by using the unconnected one. Then we started writing books without connecting the system with the unconnected system. That was easy to learn. Even though when people learn how to read and write, they love to come back to the connected one. So we started doing this kind of book, and most of the book writing by this system was my brother. And the third generation of book, or the book we started writing when I went to the university. I started an organization called Windenjangeng, Write and Read. So then we started producing book. We translating useful knowledge, the knowledge that people really need right now. So as you can see in this book, I have friends going to the medical school, and other people studying chemistry engineering, and myself going for civil engineering. We started writing the basic knowledge that people need. And those books make the writing system very popular. And you take it outside Guinea, because a lot of people learn how to read and write. Because if you see this, we have a book, how to filter water, and how a woman can take care of their kid, a pregnant woman, how to take of herself. So we produced this kind of book, and we started a newspaper called The Pen, Crumble, and those two become very popular, and people start taking book outside Guinea. And they teach we taught a lot of people, we produce a lot of reading and writing material. So even once in 2006, I went to Senegal, and I was in the market. So I ran to a place where people was teaching this book. So, and I asked them, oh, what is this? They said, this is the Fulani language. They said, do you want to learn it? I said, yes. And then the lady told me, I said, how did you get this book? She said, there is a lady sending palm oil from us, from Guinea to Dakar in Senegal. And she is the one brought those books here, and she taught us how to read and write. And I said, okay, I want to learn this. And they give me a schedule if I want to learn how to read and write. And they told me every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, they're teaching. And I left. I never told them I am the one who wrote the books. So, and the same lady, she's the one spread the script a lot, because I haven't seen even people in New York, even the city where I am living right now, in Portland, there is a young man who learned how to read and write from that lady. So she learned how to read and write. I have never seen her, but my mom saw her, and she used to buy all the books when she's traveling in another country and to teach people how to read and write. So the fourth generation of books started when I come to the US, because producing book was very difficult, because we have to write everything by hand. Whenever you do a mistake, you have to destroy that page and start again. So my goal was to start writing, using computer to write. So when I come here, I was in New York because we have a huge community of Fulani there. I taught them for 3 weeks and did like 3 or 4 presentation to them and convinced them to help producing a software. So then when I come back to Portland, where my brother is, we try to find a company that could make a keyboard for us. And we found one in Seattle. They made 3 fonts for us. We have Pular, Futa, and Aisata. That was in the name of my sister, who was the first to learn the alphabet. So when we did that software, it was built on the Arabic code point, because at that time we didn't have Unicode. So we started producing book, and the first thing we did, we bought a ladder computer with one of the Fulani organization in New York. My brother was going back home in 2008. We took those computers back to Guinea, and my brother showed them how to use it, and write books and publish newspaper. And it has been very helpful. And then the work started again, because they started asking, when are we going to use this one for our cell phone? So, and they keep calling me, asking me, and I remember telling one of the teachers, I said, this is very expensive stuff. We need a lot of money, a lot of work, because we need Unicode. At that time, I didn't really know I was doing research how to do it. But when I told him, he said, I have a lot of cow here. Can we sell them and produce to get included in Unicode? I said, no, this is, it asks more than that. And I keep doing research and working and gathering information. Eventually, we end up having information. This was the book we were producing when we have this first software. Then eventually I took calligraphy classes. So from my calligraphy classes, I met this wonderful teacher, Rebecca Wild, and she asked me a question. Why? She was asking everyone, why are you here? Why are you taking calligraphy classes? And I told her I am here to take these calligraphy classes because I want to refine our writing system and improve it. And so starting there, because she asked me, what are you doing? I said, I am a student of civil engineering, but I am just taking these classes because I want to improve our writing system. And then we become friends, we keep working together. Eventually, through her, I was able to go to the calligraphy conferences in 2011 in Portland. From that calligraphy conference, I met Randy Hassan. He's there. The next calligraphy conference in Colorado, we did a presentation together. From that conference, we meet someone who helped us to get inside in Unicode. So here I am working with Michael Everson. Just after the conference in Colorado, he came to Portland. We worked together on a proposal, and we went back to New York to finish the proposal. So from there, everything went smooth and very fast. And now we can type Adlam in Android, and people are using it a lot. So I'm going to let my brother give a concluding part.
Let's see, so this is us when we came to the Unicode Technical Committee meeting to get our proposal reviewed and approved. And we started in 2013, but we didn't get approved to 2016. So because we did, like my brother was saying, we tried to get a lot of information about Unicode, so we thought Unicode was actually the roadblock for us. And once we have Unicode, then everything will work smoothly and we'll have Adlam everywhere in every system. But that's without knowing that actually that was the beginning of another work, another journey. So this is actually what it looks like. This is the Unicode proposal. It's 24 letters because we thought of using Adlam also for other languages spoken in Africa. So that's why instead of 28, we have 6 additional letters so that you can write those languages as well. So it's right to left, and also the numbers are right to left. So then once we got approved, like I was saying, so a few months, a year later, we didn't see anything happening. Nothing happened. You take your phone, you don't see Adlam in it. You check your computer, you don't see Adlam in it. But everybody was telling us once you get it in Unicode, it's done. You will see it on the internet. It didn't happen. So what we didn't realize is that there's more work to do. So eventually, Randall Hassan, he wrote articles about Adlam, 2 long articles, and then a guy named Kaveh Waddell, I think, he works for the Atlantic. One day he saw those articles and he decided to research about Adlam. So that, after his research, so he found out about us, contacted us, interviewed us, and then he decided to write an article about Adlam. So that article is the one that triggered a lot of things, because one day, Craig Cornelius, who is an engineer at Google here, he came across that article. The article was not just about Adlam, it was also about there's a Native American script, I forgot its name. Osage, yeah. So because he was interested, he was already working on that script, and he saw that Adlam was also similar, so he decided to reach out to us. And so he contacted us, and then we started working with him. So he helped us get Adlam. Not only we got Google to hire another company to create a font for us, that's the Noto font, but also they provided support, and the Android 8 that they released in 2017 also included support for Adlam. They created a keyboard for us, which was very exciting news because now we could use at least Adlam on certain smartphones. So we're so happy. We invited Craig to come to Guinea. We were having an international conference where many countries came. More than 20 countries were represented there. So we came, and this is what it is, and in Mamu, in Guinea, in the middle of Guinea. So we had conference in Mamu and Labe, and this is an exposition of books people wrote there they were showing us. So, and this is Craig Cornelius. So he went around visiting to see what's Adlam. So these are road signs that he saw. This is in Mamu and this is in Labe. And this is how Adlam is being used in Africa right now. So, we sent some people. Once we the first time when we got a keyboard for it in 2007, and then I showed it to people when I went to Guinea. So we send our people across certain countries in Africa so they can teach Adlam, show people Adlam, the Fulanis, because we are everywhere. And these are the schools they started, people graduating, showing their certificates. This is in Guinea, and this is in Niger and Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, Chad. And so some of the challenges, even though we got supported by Android, because of fragmentation, if you get support from Android, you also have to seek support for Windows, for iOS, and that's stuff that we are working on currently, and hopefully very soon we'll get the support that we need. And also some of the issues that we had, because our punctuations, everything is right to left, and most of the stuff that's supported by Unicode is left to right. And we are using code points for scripts that are left to right, so it's still giving us some issues that they are still working on. And some of the projects that we have that we are working on is, first of all, that to get support across all the platforms and create websites so people can have access to information, create applications, and they're helping us with that as well. And have more of the conventions that we had in Guinea. We're having one in Gambia at the end of this year. And also to try to support other languages using the Adlam script. So those are the projects that we are working on currently. And Adlam has had a great impact because it has increased literacy, especially among women, because usually in Africa, people are only counted as literate if they know how to read or write in English or French. But with Adlam, even if you didn't get a chance to go to school, to the French school or to the English school, you can still learn to read and write in your own language, and that will give you access to information. And it has allowed people to write books. People who had never, imagined they can produce books. We have one guy who's never been to school. He's actually written more than 20 books in Guinea. So it has had a huge impact. And it's also helping standardize the language. Remember the story about the guy telling me we have to speak different dialects? So now the people who are, early on, people from Nigeria, when they spoke, we had a hard time understanding each other. But now when we meet, we can understand each other. When we talk to each other, we understand each other. And when they came to the conference in Guinea, we had no problems with them, the Cameroonian, Senegalese, we had no issues understanding each other. So it's helping us connect with each other and connect to the language. And so we still seek more support for Adlam in terms of technology, because we believe it will be very useful in educating the people, fighting illiteracy, because not only the language that it's designed for is spoken by 50 million people, but there's a potential 100 to 150 million people who could use the script and the language itself, because it's a lingua franca in many parts of West Africa, for example, in Guinea or northern Cameroon. So also these Hausa people have started to use Adlam to write their language, and the Hausa tribe or ethnic group is it's a very large group in Africa. They're present in Nigeria. It's one of the largest ethnic groups there. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for Adlam because Adlam is a script of our own. And I think I was just trying to go quickly, because sorry guys. So hopefully we'll try to answer more questions toward the end. Thank you.
I'm Mark, and this is my business partner, Neil Patel. And as Steven said before, we're a couple of type designers. And I'm going to tell you about a project we've been working on for the past 5 years. And we're nearing the conclusion of it now. It's a huge typeface system of African scripts. And I have to look up here. This is really strange. Okay, so we've been working on it for quite some time, and we're nearing the end of it now. We've got about 2 more months to work on it, and then it's going to be finished. And it's a massive system, and one of the complements is Adlam. So I'm going to sort of take you down the path of how we started to develop this, what our process is, how we do it, why we do it. And then I'm going to start you in on our work on the Adlam script with Abdoulaye and Ibrahima, and then Neil will take it from there and take it off to the end. So here's what we wanted to do when we started out. We wanted to design type for a part of the world where not much type is being designed. And we wanted to make a contribution to efforts to increase literacy, to developing local economies in emerging markets. And also a contribution to the proliferation and restoration of written African cultures, say pre-colonial era. Oh, and also not to forget, we also wanted to learn a lot of stuff about Africa, which is part of the fun of the whole thing. So when we started, here's what we saw. A complete absence of extensive families of African scripts. There were none of them out there at all. We saw poorly researched sterile fonts of most African scripts. There were a couple of exceptions qualitatively, but for the most part, we just saw these really staid, sterile, kind of dead things. And they were limited in scope. There was obviously limited, insufficient research that led to incorrect glyphs and diacritic placement. So there were a lot of problems with them. We also saw a chronic oversimplification of forms, almost as if anyone who ever wanted to make an African script font was trying to make Futura, but using an African script. So our response to this was to create a very large system of containing African scripts, and you see it here on this slide and the next. In light, regular, semi-bold, bold, and extra bold, we have Latin, we have Nko, we have Ge'ez, also known as Ethiopic, particularly in the tech world. We have Adlam there, and Vi. We have Osmania, Tifinagh, and Arabic. We also have Greek and Cyrillic complements in there as well. We named the typeface Kigelia after the Kigelia africana, which is a tree that's indigenous to most of the African continent. And so as you can see, when we started this thing, we were not thinking on a small scale. We were sort of going for the whole enchilada. And so, let's see, this is our map of Africa. I saw when Abdoulaye had their map up there, I saw our area showing the influence of the Adlam script, and theirs was larger, and I just thought, oh God, now I've got to improvise. So, but it is worth, there is something here to be learned, and I like to always give audiences a sense of scale, and that is that green area there, which is indicating the influence of the area, the geographic region that's influenced by the Adlam script. That's about as wide as the continental United States, coast to coast. And what's important is Abdoulaye and Ibrahima already mentioned, cell phones are everywhere. They're just all over the place. Even in areas lacking a reliable power grid, you will still have cell phones, and they really are the motors of commerce and culture on the African continent right now. So part of our brief that we gave ourselves was to design this typeface for cell phones. And that's one of the reasons why our form strategy goes from a monoweight light to a high contrast bold, is because a lot of the glyphs in the system or in these scripts are so dense and so complicated that if we went for a monoweight all the way to the bold, it would be impossible to take them there. We had to have a high contrast bold so that the glyph counters, the inside spaces, remained open, and extra bold weights were even possible in these scripts. So that was necessary for that. So a quick run through of some of the scripts that are in the system. This is Ge'ez. This is easily the oldest script that we've worked on. It's something like 2,000 to 3,000 years old, depending on which history book you're reading. And this is used in Ethiopia and Eritrea. It has a speaking community for something like 11 or 12 languages, has a speaking community of around 65 million people. And it is a bear of a compliment. It's 528 glyphs. This is the VI syllabary for the writing system of the VI people in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Also, they have a speaking community of around 119,500 people. This is a text set in the Tifinagh complement. The Tifinagh is used by the Berbers and the nomadic Tuaregs of northern Africa and the Saharan region. Amazigh and its variants has a community of around 20 million speakers. There you go. This is a text set in Osmania. Now, Osmania is a Somali script that's really no longer in daily use anymore, but it's still pretty important because for restoring and bringing into digital form historical documents in order to preserve culture and the history of the Somali people. There we go. And this is our Latin. Our Latin has a limited complement of the International Phonetics Alphabet, the IPA. Unfortunately, we're not talking about beer, but this is the International Phonetics Alphabet and the African Reference Alphabet. We have enough in there to take care of all the orthographies of African languages because hundreds of African languages use the IPA. All throughout Cameroon and Nigeria and all through the south and into the east and things like that and places like that. So someday we might build this out into a complete IPA, which would take care of the phonetic needs of the entire planet. But right now it's pretty much Africa-centric, so that all the languages there are pretty much taken care of that use the Latin script. And this is our Nko. Nko is also a script that reads right to left, is connected, and is used by the Manding people in the dialects Bambara, Mandinka, Maninka, and Jula. That's a speaking community of about 40 million people. They're also largely in Guinea, but also in Mali, Burkina Faso, for the most part in West Africa. Or as I may have said before, but I don't know because my notes aren't here. But this is the script that we're working on right now. This is the final complement in the whole family. This is our Arabic, and it is designed for use in Ajami. And when we decided on using or designing an Arabic complement, we knew we had to design a complement that was usable for Ajami in order to bring what is really a widespread practice into the modern computing environment. So we did a lot of research on this, and it wasn't until we were well into our research that we found we had stumbled into this incredible labyrinth of historical traditions and orthographic traditions. It's enormous. It's incredibly complex, and it would take another hour to talk about it. So we're not going to cover it tonight. But it's just it's just a fascinating area of language and scripts. Our complement has sub-Saharan forms, sub-Saharan Sahelian forms that will cover as much of the Ajami usage on the continent as it possibly can. It may not be possible to cover all of it stylistically, but we're working on getting it to cover as much as we possibly can. And this is our Adlam. So this is what we're here to talk about, right? And you see the unconnected variant up on top and the connected variant down at the bottom. So what's next? I'd like to tell you a little bit about our process because it's important to tell you about this so that you see how extraordinary our work with Ibrahima and Abdoulaye actually was, because we really ended up, we have a standard process for doing this. We've developed it as the project has gone along. But things really took an interesting turn, and we arrived at a result that was really quite interestingly different. So we start out with extensive research. Okay, this may seem obvious to you, but what we're really talking about here is we were researching Africa in general to learn as much as we could about its peoples, its histories, and its cultures. And so we were digging we just cast our net as wide as we possibly could. We've just gotten used to doing that in whatever it is whatever script it is we're studying. We're just trying to learn as much about it as we possibly can. So once we've done our research, or as we're doing our research, the research actually never ends. As we're doing our research, we're developing a first draft based on that. So when we were researching Adlam, though, there really wasn't that much there. Not a whole lot had been written about it. You know, when you're researching something like Ge'ez or Tiffanyog, there's loads of research and scholarly papers and things like that that you can dive into. But here with Adlam, there really wasn't a whole lot that we could dive into. And so, but we weren't too worried about that because we knew about Abdoulaye and Ibrahima, and we thought, well, the inventors are there. We could get in touch with them, and they'll give us the story, you know, about what to do. But still, we worked on developing a first draft before we got in touch with them, so we looked at the Unicode proposal. Now, Unicode proposals, to expand on that a little bit, is they usually contain a lot of basic information about a script, so that the Unicode consortium has the rationale they need in order to provide each glyph within the script with code points. And I have to say that for Neil and me, this is something that we usually leap over when we start doing our research on a script, because the glyphs in a code chart or the symbols that are in a code chart really do not say that much about the form of a script. It only shows their basic structure. But in this proposal, we saw Ibrahima's calligraphy, and we thought, well, that's a pretty good thing to start with. I mean, that must be the true story, right? And so this is something that we normally do. After we have a first draft in hand, that's when we establish contacts to the experts and people in the language communities, and we start having conversations with them. Now, for the designers in the crowd, this may seem counterintuitive, but this is not a normal situation where it is a good idea to contact and survey a target audience before you even start to design something. But we found it practical to have something in hand at first contact, because the people we're contacting have no idea who we are. They only know that we're not from their culture. So this gives us something to talk to them about, to engage them with, and to get some feedback on. And it also we found it's respectful of their time. Because as we found out, most of the Africans that we contacted were not interested in getting monetary compensation for their guidance. And so we just felt this was the most respectful way of dealing with the time that they devote to us, and that we're always grateful for. So we sent a first draft off. We got in touch with Abdoulaye and Ibrahima, and we told them what we were doing. We asked them if they were interested in giving us guidance on this, and we sent a first draft to them. And they responded. They said they were very excited about this and would be glad to give us help. And their first comment was, Adlam doesn't look like this anymore. And that was interesting. We had worked on a lot of scripts up until then, but we hadn't gotten a response like that yet. And so they told us that things had changed between when the Unicode proposal, which was 2014, and when we first contacted them, which was a couple years later. And we just thought, well, a couple years, that can't be that long, right? Not a whole lot's going to change. But we were kind of naive at that time, and we really didn't understand the dynamics behind a new script, what actually happens when a new script comes into the world. So they sent us what you see here, which showed us the form of the new letters, the new forms of the letters. Here and here's the lowercase, and even some change. There were a lot of changes in a lot of these letters, and even some changes in the numbers and the and the punctuation. So we started an exchange of proofs. Here's some proofs, and you can see once you work with the inventors of a system, you know, there's a lot of detail that you can get into, some real subtle nuance in some of the forms. And so this represents about 2 phases in maybe the 6 phases of corrections that we went through in just the unconnected variant. And then once we had pretty much arrived at a form that we pretty much agreed on was okay, then we started on the connected variant. So they sent us their initial diagrams for that, always on the familiar green graph paper, which we got very used to seeing. And this also showed some interesting variations in forms, whether it was an isolated form or an initial form or a medial form or a final form. Some interesting things happened in one single glyph. And these also went through a proofing period. But this is where something started to happen that we really didn't understand. It was kind of confusing to us. We would get the initial drawings, we would execute those, send those off. They would come back with corrections. See, they're laughing already. They would come back and they would say they would tell us to change some of the forms. Okay, we'll do that. Send the proofs back off again. Those would come back, and some other forms would have to be changed, sometimes radically, and then we'd send those off. Those proofs would come back, and some of the forms that we had changed before, well, they had to be reverted back to earlier forms. So we were really getting confused at this time. We really didn't know what was going on. You can see some changes here. Here, things totally changing. And we kind of didn't know what was going on. So at this point, I have to see the next slide. Oh yeah, so this gives you a closer, sort of a more precise view of what we were experiencing. You have to read this from top to bottom. So the top row are individual glyphs, and going down, you're seeing how they changed through some of the proofing phases. And you see some of them changed quite dramatically. This is, of course, completely unexpected for us, and not something that we had experienced before. You can see some of these things really changing dramatically. In the lower case, sometimes characters changed with respects to the x height. So by this time, we were thoroughly confused. And we got a call from, and right at about this time, when we were just sort of plugging away at it and getting more changes, and each time Abdoulaye would write, "It's getting close, it's looking good," you know, just a few more corrections, and then we'd have some forms just totally change on us again. And then he gave us a call, and he said, "Look, we need to meet on this." And we had the same idea that I think we both felt that emails and phone calls and PDFs were not cutting it anymore. So it was time to go out and meet them. I couldn't do it because of my teaching schedule, but Neil made the trip, and I'm going to let him take it from here.
So Mark couldn't make it, and so the first thing I said the following week, like, I'll be there for next week. So Thursday, I booked a flight from Portland to Portland, flew out there, and I had set aside a couple days. We're going to work on this for a couple days, and this is kind of what our schedule was for a couple days. We'd meet up around noon. We'd pretty much work solidly until about dinner time. Abdoulaye would prepare dinner while Ibrahima and I still work. Work a little more, stop for tea. It's very strong tea. And then we'd probably wrap around midnight. And then I would get back to the hotel. My head would be full of information. I'd be full of caffeine. And probably about 3 or 4 o'clock, I'd go to sleep. And then we just sort of repeat that the next day. But it was very informative. We pretty much worked on we went through every glyph, one at a time. We changed, and basically nothing was left unchanged. And what I would do as we were talking about it and discussing what the things we want to do with the forms. I would rough them right out in glyphs with them so we could all see and agree upon what we're looking at. But I also walked away with pages of notes. And these are useful things. These are like the finer details, because I'm trying to draw real fast. It's kind of sloppy. Things that I needed to go revisit when I got back to Maine and talked to Mark. And we also talked about a few other things, like how the writing system worked, and more about the functionality of the typefaces. So I had a lot of these notes of things I had to follow up on. So this is what we ended up. So here's what it looked like pre-meeting, after those iterations Mark was showing, this sort of 7 or so iterations before we got into the meeting, and how we came out of it after the meeting. And kind of just tried to highlight, here's some things that changed fairly significantly. A lot of these letter forms, there's a lot of more just minor changes, little things with proportion and stuff. And then there's a lot of fine-tuning stuff, things with like just curvatures and connections and proportions, things that, they're very subtle details, things that are very easy to discuss in person. And one of the real advantages of being able to work in person was that I could actually watch, Ibrahim sketch the letters. It's like, I could see it. It's like, oh, okay, that's, we have an interpretation of the ductus sometimes, or what you can get away with or can't get away with. This gives us a better understanding, but also kind of told us sometimes like, oh, okay, that's really integral to the form of the letter. This is sort of, a little bit of an embellishment, and those kinds of, because if you read those, drawings too literally, which you can do as a type designer, especially when that's your only source, you can put a lot of importance in small things that may not be the really relevant part of the letter form. Another dramatic thing, as Mark sort of mentions, we changed the X height, we bumped it up. And there's a thing that happened, so they've always had this upper and lower case. There was this, the initial Unicode proposal didn't have the uppercase included. It came in a later thing, the later Unicode proposal, which is what ultimately got accepted. There was never a typeface developed for that Unicode proposal. So if you look, it was set up on this reference of Latin X height, and all they did is they shrunk the letters and put them into that box. And so if you're looking at that as a reference, it was wrong. And the ideal proportions need to have a kind of leaner, narrower kind of thing, and that was getting lost with the lower X height. So we kind of bumped the X height up, make it totally different from Latin X height, and that kind of really helped give the characters the kind of aesthetic properties that they were looking for. The other thing, so we weren't just talking about the letter forms. Like I mentioned, we're looking at how this language is being used and how the written language is being used. And one of the things we discovered was the provision that was made in Unicode for pre-nasalization of consonants was not going to be adequate. Unicode had planned on using just a Latin apostrophe. They're like, oh, you can use the Latin apostrophe. It looks like it, do it, it'll be fine. And the way it works is that you use this apostrophe-like character in between a nasalizing letter, like noon, and a subsequent consonant. In this case, in the bottom row there, it's a D sound, a dal, and use that, and that's how you know it's a D sound. But you want the script to connect. So when you use a Latin apostrophe, the script doesn't connect because it's an apostrophe. There's also provisions in shaping where you have to consider the fact that an apostrophe is punctuation. And this is what we need is actually a letter modifier. That's how it gets dealt with properly for shaping. So once we discovered that, I was like, oh, wow, this is wrong. We're trying to deliver this typeface, and like this thing that can't even be used properly. So luckily, I was able to, got back to Maine. I immediately called Microsoft, and we started talking to the folks there and said, hey, we got to do something about this. And they were great, and they kind of helped push forward a Unicode proposal, which is this one, and got that resolved actually really quickly for us. Here we go. So after we got back to Maine, Mark and I went through all our notes, and then we kind of rolled out all those changes through the whole system, right? So we have the regular, all the weights out to extra bold and extra bold italic. And this is sort of a little bit of a thing. The weights, and how the weights came together, that's something Mark and I had a little more influence over. And, you saw the drawings that Mark was showing, that everything was done on the lightweight, right? On the sort of the monolinear or monoweight drawing. So we had to kind of interpret how that was going to work in the heavier weights. But being able to sit down and look at and work through it together in Portland, that gave us a really good sensibility of how to kind of translate those forms into these other things. This is also, I don't know if Mark's mentioned, is probably the first italic Adlam typeface. Yeah, like Unicode one anyway, right? Okay, so And then we also, because we were at the same time contracted to develop Microsoft's system font, Ibrahima, added Adlam complement to that. So we went and rolled all those changes into Ibrahima as well. And this design's a little different. It's a mono-weight design as opposed to our contrasted design. So, needless to say, we've talked about oh yeah, this is a different process. Working on Adlam is a different process than other writing systems we've worked on. Obviously because we're working with inventors, that's what we've been talking about. But there's also more stuff there, right? And one is the age, right? Adlam is started in the 80s and then sort of come out, evolving and adapting to this date. But that age makes a bit of a difference, and Mark sort of alluded to this. So this script here, this is Mko. We saw this before in one of Mark's specimens. Mko is about 40 years old in Adlam, and in that time frame when it was established, there's a lot of manuscripts that we can study. And as designers, what we get from this is that in addition to the sort of letter forms themselves, we can see the variation that's allowable in letter forms, what sort of naturally flows when you connect things together. We get a sense of color and rhythm, and these can be sort of target references for us as designers. It's a very useful thing, right, to have that kind of breadth of stuff to look at. That's kind of what we look for as designers. With Adlam, as we mentioned, there are manuscripts, things to study, but they're from older generations. So while we can kind of infer some things about form and flow from them, they're not of the design that we were trying to make, the latest generation of the iteration of the design. And so we can't really interpret the same things from that. So it becomes really important in the case of Adlam that we had to work with the Barrys. It's very important, right? Because it's the only way you can get those insights. So that's just the form side of things. Working with Adlam is also different because there's these other weird complications. From a technology perspective, Adlam is one of the few modern scripts that's encoded in the supplementary multilingual plane of Unicode. It's a lot of technical stuff. The basic gist of it is the basic multilingual plane where everything else is ran out of space. So they needed to add an extra digit to the encoding characters, and that's where some new stuff is going. It seems like a little thing, but the problem is most programs don't support this very well. And so you can see there's I'm kind of comparing it to Arabic because it has some similar shaping qualities, but in order to be able to type in Arabic in a computer, you send that hexacode value there, that 0627, boom, that's what you get. To use it to use Adlam in computers, you can't send 1E900, you got to say, okay, I got to send two different characters together as a pair. They're called surrogate pairs, and that goes through. It's a little kind of complicated, but the point is programs aren't really dealing with this well. And what that also meant as designers is that our programs, the things we needed to use to actually develop the typeface, didn't work very well. So when we started this project, glyphs would crash. You start typing stuff and poof, dies. InDesign would crash, start typing stuff, messy. It would also start doing weird things where it sort of treats it half like Arabic and tries to use Arabic word boundaries and mismatches all the sort of positional forms. It was just painful to use. Word was sort of frustrating to use as well. Things, cursor positions move around and all kinds of weird things. So we're trying to develop a typeface, we're trying to proof it, and our tools don't even work. But we're trying to deliver this thing at the same time. Fortunately, partway through the process, glyphs was fixed because those guys are really fast and they're awesome. InDesign, sorry, Chris. Still very painful to use. Word is getting better. It's still not perfect, but it keeps getting better, which is great. So at this point, it's still very difficult for us to put together proofs. We have, even little things like we have a little thing in an exhibition in LA this weekend, just to put just to make the artwork for it. It takes way too much time. But this is where we're at. But that's just our problems, right? If we can't use it, Fulani can't use it on phones, right? Abdoulaye mentioned that Google did produce the Noto font, and they also produced a keyboard. But the initial release, the font came out. It was included in Android. It kind of worked on Android 7, definitely worked on Android 8. And there was no accompanying keyboard right off the bat. There was a little bit of a gap. And so while we were working on this, we said, okay, let's just try to kind of bridge that gap. So we created our own Android keyboard as part of this process. And it was all right, people can use this right away. And part of the reason is we know that at that time, most Android phones in Africa that we were seeing from our work on Unko were Android 6 and lower, right? And so we knew, like, okay, you have to wait till Android 8. That's not going to be great. So at least this way we can kind of support it. And the way we do that was this little trick. We created this utility in the app where you can compose a message. You could use a shared utility, and it sends it as an image. So it's not an idea we invented, but it's one we sort of implemented here. So you can message as with images. Your phone doesn't support the text. It doesn't matter. You can still see the image. And it's a temporary thing. It's a stopgap. We knew that. In the end, it's going to be fine. But it's important because this is, should click, OK, because of the delay. So an Android release in Africa, this is data from aggregated data from our apps that we have. It could take up to 2 years to hit critical mass, right? So if you came out with Android 7 instead, or Android 8, and it's starting to work, you could see like Android 8 still hasn't really hit critical mass. We see Android 7 sort of started hitting critical mass 2 years after its release. So, it's when Abdoulaye was saying, it's like, okay, I got it in Unicode, maybe there's a font showing up. Why can't I use it on my phone? It's like, well, you can, but you don't have the right phone because nobody sells those yet. And so this is what we're trying to keep up with. And this is what we tried to kind of circumvent in the short term. So that just sort of highlights one example of the sort of complex dynamics that are involved in when you're working with a new writing system like Adlam. If we're focusing just on the fonts and the phones and how people are using it, that's only really a small part of the picture, right? And so if you kind of step back, you can see all these other factors play a role, right? In how people can access Adlam, how they can actually get to it on their phone. It's not just, naively, I think we just went into it saying, oh yeah, you need a font, you need a phone, you need a keyboard, life's good. It's not really that simple. And so when I was in Portland, we were able to talk about some of these other dynamics, how people, culture, and community, everyone's interacting with these things. And so I'm trying to illustrate this way. This is a plot I kind of show a few times in the past. I keep refining it. The way I've tried to envision this is like what do all those interactions mean, right? Like, here's all the factors go in, but what does that really how does that play out? And so I tried to create this chronology of how a culture comes into adopting the internet. And so for reference, this is us here in the States, in America. Here's some of those factors broken out, individual things. And you can see that, this really sparse bit on the left, this is like, our past. Like, English has, been used as a written language well before the internet, right? And because of that, we've had this time to build up literacy and education practices, and we have loads of content in print and that sort of thing. We've got infrastructure and power grids and payment methods, all that happens. And then all of a sudden we get into computing, and then we start doing all this complex stuff. But it's this linear progression. We were able to kind of build on this existing foundation. If you look at how this works in Adlam, this is what it is, right? It's much compressed. All that stuff's happening at once, which is really kind of a whole different scenario, right? In Africa, the Barrys had brought computers over, but for the large part, most people weren't using desktop computing. They've really jumped right to mobile-based computing. There's a lot of evolution happening in mobile-based computing, and at the same time, because it's a new script, people are learning to read it and write it. It's going on since they've created it in the 80s, but it's increasingly growing. So you see, when you have a chart like this, you see all these things have to interact with one another. That's different, right? That's not how our setup was created. This is happening all simultaneously, and that makes a very unique thing. It gets complicated. There's so many ways you can map out the interactions. I'm going to do one here without my notes, so this will be fun. This is an interaction that we're going to look at. So basically, just as if you wanted to be able to use Adlam on a phone, so you got your smartphones, you want to be able to use Adlam on it. So what do you need? You need to be able to shape that. You need Unicode IDs, you need to be able to shape it on that phone, the operating system needs to support it. Okay, that's cool. If I have that, then I at least need fonts, and I need a way to type it. So I get that. That's cool. But really, if you want to get the full experience of being able to use Adlam on phones, right? It's not just being able to send text messages. You want to be able to use apps and all the sort of everything you could possibly we use on our phones all day long. You want to be able to do the same thing. So you want to be able to get localized apps. So all those things in place are important, but how do you get localized apps? To get localized apps, you need to have a revenue stream for someone who develops the apps. There has to be an incentive for it. That incentive is usually a payment method. So if you want to purchase the app, that would be how you do it. Except credit cards is really not a thing in Africa, right? That's not the primary payment method, but most app stores are credit card based. So if you're talking about the widespread ability to do this, there's no real incentive to do it that way through payments. So okay, that's fine, we can go to advertising. Well, advertising networks are not very strong in Africa. You probably get, from our experience, it's not uncommon, about 1 cent per ad click. So you have to move a lot of ads to be able to get any sort of legitimate revenue out of that as a methodology. And then there's this other complication is that even though the internet coverage is much better than probably is in the US, I mean, you can get, I think sounds like you can get internet just about anywhere, but it's expensive. And because it's expensive, people don't really leave their phones connected to the internet all the time. And so that means if you have, even if you had a good ad network, if you can't deliver those ads because people's phones are off, then you're not getting revenue out of it. So if you still want to get this incentive to build localized apps, we kind of don't have the incentives. And where does this one go next? Okay, so how did I get to that point? Okay, so you don't have the incentives, so you don't build the apps, but one of the incentives for building a stronger ad network is to have localized apps. It's all very circular, right? You got to keep, everything has to be a stake in the ground to build the next stake, but nobody wants to build the next stake because the other stake isn't in the ground. So we can't have these localized apps. And if you don't have localized apps, then what's the real incentive for a cell phone manufacturer to really say, hey, I should go support Adlam. I'll stick with French or I'll stick with English, right? And that's the problem. But what I think is more interesting is how all these interactions really kind of affect education, literacy, and content creation. Because in the end, that's sort of like a robust online community. And this is something that Abdoulaye mentioned. So education in Adlam, it's not government-centered, right? It's not state-run, it's grassroots. Everything's grassroots, heavy grassroots effort. There's a lot of privately run schools that people set up themselves, but increasingly a lot of this activity is happening online. Right, so even with our limited support, despite how incomplete the support is, you can go on Facebook, you can go on in these social media apps, and you can learn how to read, and that's kind of interesting, right? That's a different thing. Also, and then when you kind of look at content creation, this sort of follows a similar thing. So we're talking about phones again. So we're not creating, websites aren't really what's being created because that's real difficult to do on the phone. But all that great content goes is into social media apps. It's much more convenient. You can put this stuff in Facebook, you can put it in WhatsApp, Telegram, you can put it in WhatsApp, and that's how everyone is communicating. But and at the same time, we actually do have, we see all the market editions, these sort of printed long format books. So there's content, right? Except the content is not publicly viewable online, right? And why this sort of matters is that, if you were to look for it, if you were to just do it, the problem is you can't just do a Google search and say hey, there's tons of Adlam out there. We got to get on this and support it, because it's hard to find unless you know where to look. So if you know to go find these Facebook pages, you can go find it. If you're not invited to the WhatsApp or Telegram chat rooms, then you're never going to find it. You could say, who cares if Westerners know if it exists or not? It doesn't arguably matter, except for the one fact that really sort of the gatekeepers to internet and internet technology are coming from Western countries. So if they can't find it and don't think it's relevant, then there's no incentive to support it. So that's sort of an interesting thing. I think the other thing to note, this is important, is sort of, we talk about Africa. This is we've seen those maps of where with the Fulani are in Africa, but we're talking about people everywhere. This is the diaspora. This is everywhere we see users of our Adlam apps in the world hits. The concentration's strongest in Africa, but we're talking about a diaspora that's sort of all over the world. Right? So we're not talking about limited scope of this community. We're talking about a community that's large and everywhere and bringing all this influence into it. Another thing to sort of note, this is something Abdoulaye showed, that the language dynamics in Africa are way more complicated than anywhere else. There's just more multilingualism, I think, than probably anywhere else in the world. If there's a lingua franca in a region, I think it gets used by a lot of people. But there's also this thing of, so here's an example of someone showing how to write Hausa using the Adlam script. And there's something that Mark and I have kind of discovered, through this thing, is that, these writing systems, in Africa, the writing systems, they're more than just like a writing system like we consider Latin. We sort of just, hey, this is just how we write stuff. it's a bit of cultural identity. There's a factor in there that adds a little more value. And so I think there is there's an attraction to being, if you have this truly African writing system that was created in Africa by Africans, that could be an attractive thing to adapt your writing system to, right? And that can have maybe potentially more traction than the thing you get stuck with, which is Latin a lot of times. So I think there's this interesting dynamic. I'll go back. And so I think the one thing to conclude from this is, like, we're looking at that evolution. Mark was showing all the sort of things are changing. But really, a lot of that is in response to all this stuff that's happening. In the past couple of years, because you're able to use Adlam in some capacity on the internet, even though it wasn't like wholly perfect, people are communicating, they're sharing ideas, they're talking, I've seen is like, I went on the other day, it's like, how do I transliterate Latin to thing? And then Abdoulaye goes and responds. Like, you can, the language, the usage of the writing system is being formalized. We're seeing other languages coming in. We're dealing with some technological issues and things are changing. So, that's I think what we were seeing when the script is sort of evolving a little bit, and that's what we were seeing, and that's what we're sort of responding to. That's the evolution we were trying to capture before our deadlines. And that's, I think, particularly interesting. This is what's sort of different with a new script than with an established script. But this kind of creates its own complications because, see, the business of standardization, or language localization, standardization, it's all based on, firm definable standards and then return on investments. That's how you decide to support a writing system. And it's, it's fair standardization, makes sense. If anyone wants to be able to support a writing system, they need to have clear guidelines on how to approach that and do it and whatever. But sometimes it can feel like the industry doesn't wholly accept that, there's going to be a certain amount of script reform. This is a brand new script. Things are going to happen. Things are changing. And part of that march to achieve like a final standard, or quote unquote final standard, like as if any language's written form ever really properly finalizes, but mostly stable, is sort of dependent on being able to actually use it on the internet. That's the difference, right? Like, established languages have been doing this, been going on for hundreds of years and slowly evolving and hitting a standard. This is happening now sort of in conjunction with the internet. And so so Adlam is sort of a little bit wrapped up in it, and that I think is what makes it more unique than, sort of any other writing system you can design for. And so it takes some effort to kind of overcome this inertia that, like, okay, we got to be a little bit adaptive to this thing because people really want standards. And this is a little bit exacerbated by the fact that phones, unlike desktop computers, they're not that customizable by the user, right? This is a little different. And it's, by design, you want a consistent user experience. You could argue there's some security component to that, but the user really can't do much to change anything on their phone. So if you want an input, new input method or improved support, or just adding a character that was missing to Adlam, you have to wait for the operating system to deal with it. And that just might not happen fast enough for the people on the ground that are using this every day. So we have this scenario here. This is Nodo, and this is our font Kigelia. So Kigelia was kind of the latest revision close, to the whole thing, and this thing is adapted to modern usage and all that sort of thing. And this is going to show up in Microsoft products. At the same time, we have Nodo, which is the kind of experience everyone's having on Android right now. And so there's this disparate thing, and it's something we're sort of working on. But we almost kind of force ourselves to creating new forms of, we kind of almost trap ourselves into creating confusing scenarios because we're a little bit restrictive in how the tech gets deployed. So this kind of quickly, I'll kind of wrap this up. So this kind of goes into like really the last step of our process of designing typefaces, and it's kind of important. It's really this sort of bit about developing apps. And it's sort of very informative. It gives back to the community, and of course, we can evaluate things. So in addition to our keyboard app, we've actually done a few other things. We've created calculators. These are sort of basic utilities. So we have a simple one that's sort of for education, everyday use. We have a more complex one that does unit and currency conversion. We have this sort of stopgap keyboard you can use on Windows with Adlam while Microsoft is developing theirs. So just always trying to keep people able to use it, right? Always trying to maintain the momentum, not get lost in waiting for things. And then with Ibrahima's help, we developed this add-on for Google where you could take Latin-based Pular text, and it'll translate it into Adlam for you. This is kind of thing we're hoping that, like, okay, we're talking about needing this corpus of content It's like how you build a richer online community. There's stuff out there in Latin. If we can kind of like do this and be able to port it into websites, then we get all this Adlam content quickly. That's, I think, important. And I think all this stuff is fundamentally, the way we see it, is like, one, we learn a lot about how the script gets used. I think that's important as a type designer. And I think it's important with new scripts because this is how it's being done. It's not like we have piles of books to go look at. In the newest, most recent version of Adlam, we have to see this. And some of this stuff is adapting to the internet. So it's an important tool for us. But it also allows us to kind of sort of build, I don't know, little bridges, put little stakes in the ground so bigger companies can see like, oh, okay, this is happening, this is being used. And then that might incentivize them to kind of get more involved. And so to kind of wrap this up, I think, Adlam's this new script, and I think it's important, I guess I had some really nice verbiage here for this, but so we get, we kind of believe that like, a typeface is really, the whole primary purpose is communication, right? And if you design a typeface sort of in isolation from, the community that uses it and the environment it works in, you're sort of failing to do the job, right? And that's why we really feel it's important to kind of adapt our methodologies, get involved in things like app development, and get more involved in the user community and working with OEMs to inform them about things that we learn and how to make the experience better. And I think that's really how we adapt and make our process work towards making Adlam work better in computers. So that's it. I'm out of time.
This is for anyone, really. Prior to the font, the Noto font, was Android the primary phone used in your region, or was there a sudden change to everyone using Android because that was where you could access Adlam?
Yes, Android is actually the most popular phone in Africa anyway, so most people, that's what they use. But what is interesting is when Google decided to support Adlam, so a lot of people who were holding on their old, Android 7, Android 6 phones, once they got the means, they decided to upgrade. So that's why, even Neil and I were talking about that, so he created this keyboard that can be used even on older Android. At the beginning, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it, but he's seeing the usage drop. That's because more people are upgrading to the new phones, so that comes with already a built-in Adlam keyboard in it. So it's changing a little bit of how people are using, or changing people's buying decisions on phones.
Also, some people, they really didn't want to leave their iPhone. They switched to Android.
Yes.
Like I know some people in New York, they still have two phones now because they love their iPhone and they want to see what people are writing on the internet in Adlam. Yeah. So they're buying, they have two phones. And they keep asking me when Apple going to support this. I say, I don't know. Yeah.
Saw another question over here, and then we've got two more. They've given us 10 minutes for questions, so.
Thank you. Actually, I have two questions. One simple one. Do you have an estimate how many people are actually using Adlam nowadays in daily life, so outside the classroom? And that second question is more about the evolution. You mentioned that there were a lot of changes between, say, the shapes used in Unicode and your current font design. So what prompted all the changes?
Yeah, I think the second one, the changes were sort of, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but it's sort of, as the thing starts getting wider spread use on the internet and people are using it, and you kind of can see like, oh, okay, people may be a little confused by this, or there's a little bit ambiguity between this letterform and this letterform, or in this medial position, it's not quite clear. And so part of it is them trying to standardize it and make it a little easier for people to do it. So that was one of the things. But I think it is, and I think we're both kind of chasing the design solutions to some of the problems, so that there's that going on at the same time. But I think the motivation is trying to converge to a complete thing. And there had been multiple generations, and so some of this stuff was like, all right, I think it really makes sense to kind of go back to kind of an older form. This one might not be working so great. So I think that's a lot of it, and that was really where all the iterations kind of came from.
So the first question was.
Oh, what was the first question? Sorry. Oh, how many people?
Oh, that we have no idea, but we know, like we were saying, showing on the map, we get so people are using it from Guinea all the way to Sudan. So, but we can't really, we don't have an estimate on how many people, but we know a lot of people are using it because now what's interesting is every time I wake up and I look at my phone, I see always. It used to be very rare to see content, in Adlam. But now it's daily, it's constant. And people are always sending us, pictures or videos of schools that they've opened in their countries or requesting new teachers or instructors. So, yeah, it's being used a lot, but we don't have an estimate because like he was saying, it's not like government driven. It's more grassroots people, communities getting up and deciding, they need to educate their people in their own language and starting schools. So it's used a lot, but it's just we don't have an estimate.
So to tell you, I was really surprised. I was recently in Brussels. I was invited to the Adlam conferences. So I went there. I haven't been in one single Fulani family where people don't know how to read and write, all the kids. And they have, like in Brussels, 5 learning centers. That is not in Africa. This is Brussels. Yeah. So because we have a huge community, Fulani community in Brussels. So we have a lot of people, a lot. And also so even in North Cameroon, they want us introduce Adlam in school. Yeah. They were going to use Fulani to go with the French and English school. In the government school, they're working on book right now. They're going to start teaching Fulfulde and using the Adlam script.
Okay, one more question. Okay. All the way over here.
Hi, so I want to come back with the very first letter that you decided to draw together. And it's something artificial because it's out of your idea. So those are, I'm not sure, those are not sounds like our alphabet, right? It's something else. So a letter, your letters, how they function? I mean, are there long sounds or short sounds? And why you did a shape like you did? How you started? What is it about?
So for the first letter, I think that was the question, right? Yeah. The first letter that we did is the letter A. The sound A. That's I like to say it's because it's the first letter of my name. So when we started working on it, that was the first letter we chose to create. And even though the first design we did for that letter is actually we dropped it off, it's no longer being used because at one point we came to the conclusion that we wanted that was like a middle generation iteration. So we wanted all the vowels to be shorter than the consonants. So because the A was taller, so we dropped it too. But that's how we did it. But then it just based on usage or based on what we could think of that's more frequently said in our language. That's how we created the letter. There was no particular order. And then the second thing is when we created them, because we were so young and we were being educated in Arabic, so the first way to read the letters was very similar to the way Ajami was read in our language. Because the Fulani people, when they started using Arabic, they adapted the reading of the letters, the Arabic letters to our own language. So we do have the Alif, Dal, Lam, Mim, Ba, Sinye, Mim. So when we created the letters, we just adapted that sound. But later on, we dropped it. We made it just shorter names. So it's A, Da, La, Ma, Ba, Sa, till the end, just to make it easier for people because we found out it was more confusing for people when you combine a vowel and a consonant. If the consonant is, for example, Sinye, but it's supposed to mean Sa. But if it's just Sa and then you add an E to it, it becomes C, so it was easier for people to understand and read that. So we dropped the long form of pronunciation, we just kept the short one. The order. Yeah, the order we didn't, like I said, we had no particular order. We just, as we created the letters, we decided to organize them Misiki.
So what was interesting about it also, when we have all the letters, the 27, we didn't put it in the order like French, because we were going to French school, and Arabic. Like in Arabic, they say Aba, Tasa. So in French, A, B, C, D. Even some of the people ask me that questions, journalists and one of my teacher, they say, why you decided A, Da? Just after the A, you have Da, not B. So I said, I don't know, we just choose to do it like this. And what happened, like almost 20 years later, because at one point, Adlam teachers started asking, what is the name of the writing system? I said that we call it the Fulani writing system, Bindi Pular. And they said we need a name, and we said we can come up with the name. And there was one of the teacher and writer, he were invited by Harvard University. He wrote like 32 books. So he said, we need a name for this writing system. You have to give us a name. I said, we can't. We tried, but we can't find any name. And what happened, all the teachers gathered together in Guinea. They look at the alphabet, they decided to come up with the name. What happened, they just chose the first 4 letters, which had a deep meaning in the Fulani language. I don't know, it just was like a coincidence. Yeah, it come together, we have Adalama, which was not looking like French or Arabic, but they said the first 4 letters, Adla Dandi Lenyol Am Majere. They come up with many different definitions, and they give the name. They said, just let's call this Adlam, because the purpose of the letters, the 28 letters here, the 4 letters have the purpose of the letters, because it just can tell you these letters have prevent people from ignorance.